Right now, I am struggling with a difficult situation. My beautiful marriage was once a source of immense joy and fulfillment. However, my addiction to masturbation began to unravel the very fabric of our relationship. What started as a private habit soon spiraled out of control, consuming my thoughts and actions. The secrecy and shame only made it worse. As I reflect on my journey, I realize how this addiction influenced every aspect of my life. It affected my relationship with my wife, leading to a breakdown in communication and intimacy. The trust we once had was eroded by my constant need to hide my behavior. I never thought of masturbation as a problem. It started as a normal exploration of my own body and a way to relieve stress. In the beginning, it was just a harmless habit, something I did in private and didn't think much about. However, as time went on, it became more frequent and obsessive. My habits slowly turned into an addiction. I found myself seeking out opportunities to be alone so I could indulge in my compulsion. It became a daily ritual, something I couldn't go without. The more I engaged in it, the more I needed it, and it began to take over my thoughts and actions. My work, social life, and most importantly, my marriage began to suffer. At first, my wife didn't notice the change, but as my addiction grew, so did the distance between us. I started avoiding intimacy with her, preferring my own company, and the instant gratification I got from masturbation. Our sex life dwindled, and with it, our emotional connection. She tried to talk to me about the growing distance between us, but I brushed her concerns aside, convinced that I had everything under control. I was wrong. My addiction had made me selfish and detached. I was no longer the attentive, loving partner she married. I became irritable, secretive, and emotionally unavailable. The breaking point came one night when she confronted me directly about my behavior. She had found my hidden stash of pornography and confronted me about my constant withdrawal from our relationship. I couldn't deny it any longer. I confessed my addiction, but instead of seeking help, I fell deeper into shame and guilt. Our arguments became more frequent and intense. She felt betrayed and hurt, and I felt trapped in my addiction. The love we once shared was overshadowed by resentment and disappointment. I knew I was losing her, but I felt powerless to change. Eventually, the strain became too much for our marriage to bear. She left, unable to continue in a relationship where she felt unloved and unwanted. Her departure left a void in my life that was impossible to fill. The reality of my situation hit me hard. I was alone, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. When my wife left, the house felt emptier than ever before. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of the love and companionship I had lost. The loneliness hit me like a tidal wave, overwhelming and inescapable. Every room echoed with memories of happier times, and every quiet moment was filled with a profound sense of loss. Loneliness quickly turned into isolation. I withdrew from friends and family, too ashamed and embarrassed to explain what had happened. I avoided social gatherings and stopped answering phone calls. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was emotional and psychological. I felt like I was trapped in a dark, suffocating bubble, cut off from the world. In the silence of my isolation, I was forced to confront myself. There was no escaping the reality of what I had done and how far I had fallen. The loneliness acted like a mirror, reflecting all my flaws, mistakes, and regrets back at me. It was a painful but necessary process. I had to face the truth about my addiction and the damage it had caused. The emotional toll of loneliness was immense. I felt a constant ache in my chest, a heavy weight that never seemed to lift. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake for hours, replaying every argument, every moment of intimacy I had rejected, every sign of love I had ignored. The regret was like a relentless storm battering my mind and heart. The loneliness also took a toll on my mental health. I began to struggle with anxiety and depression. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible, and the simplest tasks seemed overwhelming. My mind became a battlefield, filled with negative thoughts and self-criticism. The more isolated I felt, the deeper I sank into a state of despair. Desperation crept in as the days turned into weeks and then months. I longed for human connection, for someone to talk to, someone to share my pain with. But the shame of my actions kept me from reaching out. I felt unworthy of love and friendship. convinced that I had destroyed any chance of happiness. As my addiction grew, so did the amount of time I spent thinking about and engaging in the act. It became a constant distraction. During work hours, my mind would frequently drift away from the tasks at hand. Meetings, deadlines, and projects all began to take a backseat to my compulsive need. The more I gave in to the addiction, the harder it became to concentrate and stay focused on my job. Procrastination became my constant companion. Instead of working on important assignments, I would find myself seeking opportunities to be alone. The urge to masturbate would overpower my sense of duty and responsibility. I began to delay important tasks, telling myself I would get to them later. But later often never came, and my work started to pile up. My performance at work suffered significantly. Tasks that once took me a few hours to complete now took days. My productivity plummeted, and the quality of my work declined. I missed deadlines, produced subpar work, and failed to meet the expectations of my colleagues and superiors. My once stellar reputation at work began to tarnish, and my confidence took a hit. My relationships with colleagues also began to deteriorate. I became irritable and withdrawn, avoiding social interactions and team collaborations. The camaraderie I once shared with my co-workers faded as I isolated myself more and more. My lack of engagement and poor performance didn't go unnoticed, and it affected the team dynamics and overall morale. The constant distraction and decline in performance led to increasing anxiety and guilt. I was aware of the damage I was causing, but I felt powerless to stop. The stress of knowing I was failing at my job, combined with the guilt of my addiction, created a vicious cycle. The more anxious and guilty I felt, the more I turned to masturbation as a coping mechanism, further exacerbating the problem. The professional consequences were severe. My boss noticed my declining performance and called me in for a series of meetings. I received warnings and was put on performance improvement plans. Despite my best efforts to hide my addiction, it became clear that something was seriously wrong. I was passed over for promotions and important projects, and my career progression came to a halt. At my lowest point, I was at serious risk of losing my job. My addiction had consumed me to the extent that I was no longer reliable or productive. The fear of unemployment added to my stress and anxiety, but even this looming threat wasn't enough to break the cycle. I am trapped in my addiction, watching helplessly as my career crumbles around me. I am reaching out to you today with a heavy heart and a deep sense of vulnerability. Sharing my story isn't easy, but I believe that transparency and honesty are crucial steps toward healing. As you now know, my addiction to masturbation has had devastating consequences on my marriage, my work, and my overall well-being. Today I am asking for your help and support in my journey to rebuild and restore what I have lost. I come to you with a heavy heart, seeking guidance and support. My addiction cost me my marriage, my self-esteem, and my happiness. I stand before you now, vulnerable and desperate for a way out of this dark place. I am reaching out to you in the hope that you can offer me advice and support. I am willing to do whatever it takes to overcome my addiction and rebuild my life. I am determined to win back my wife's trust and rebuild our relationship. If you have experienced similar struggles or know someone who has, please share your insights. Your guidance could be the lifeline I need to find my way out of this darkness. I want you to know that I am fully committed to overcoming my addiction and restoring my marriage. I know the road to recovery will be long and challenging, but I am ready to take the first step. Asking for help is never easy, but I've come to realize that it is a necessary part of healing. Your support can make a world of difference in my life, helping me to overcome my addiction and work towards restoring my marriage. Thank you for listening and for your kindness.